Standing in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, I watched my daughter Sarah raise her champagne glass, her white gown shimmering under the chandeliers. My heart swelled with pride until she spoke those words that shattered 30 years of love. All my life, I wanted to have a different father, and finally this dream has come true. She embraced her new father-in-law, Harold Ashford, while 200 guests applauded. I set down the envelope containing her wedding gift and walked out, my world crumbling with each step. The memory of raising Sarah alone still burns fresh in my mind even after all these years. When Margaret passed away from cancer, Sarah was only 8 years old. I remember sitting in that hospital room holding my wife's frail hand while she made me promise to give our daughter everything she deserved in life. Margaret's final words echo in my heart. Ronald, be both mother and father to her. Promise me she'll never feel alone. I kept that promise with every fiber of my being. As a construction foreman, I wasn't wealthy, but I was determined. I took every overtime shift available, working 16-hour days under the scorching sun and through freezing winters. My hands became permanently calloused. My back ached constantly, but seeing Sarah's smile made every sacrifice worthwhile. The private school tuition nearly broke me financially. $12,000 a year seemed insurmountable, but I managed. I sold my motorcycle, the vintage Harley, that belonged to my father. I moved us from our 3-bedroom house to a modest 2-bedroom apartment closer to her school. The smaller space meant nothing compared to the education she would receive. I missed my own mother's funeral because it coincided with Sarah's college graduation from Northwestern University. My siblings called me heartless, but they didn't understand. Mom would have wanted me to be there for Sarah's big moment. That day, watching her walk across that stage in her cap and gown, I felt Margaret's presence. Every sacrifice had led to this moment of triumph. 3 years ago, everything began to change. Sarah had just started her law career at Preston and Associates when she met James Ashford at a charity gala. He seemed decent enough, a bit sheltered perhaps, but genuinely kind. The problem wasn't James. It was his father, Harold Ashford. The first time I met Harold, he looked at my calloused hands during our handshake and barely concealed his disgust. "So Ronald," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness, "Sarah tells me you work in construction. How industrious." The way he pronounced industrious made it sound like a disease. During family dinners, Harold would constantly steer conversations toward topics designed to highlight my supposed ignorance. He'd discuss his latest acquisition of some European company, then turn to me with mock interest. "Ronald, I don't suppose you follow international markets." "No, of course not. Your work must keep you quite grounded." Sarah initially defended me, but gradually, insidiously, her attitude shifted. She started making excuses for why I couldn't attend certain events. "Dad, the Ashfords are hosting a wine tasting with their business associates. You'd probably be bored." Or, "It's just a small gathering at their country club. You hate golf anyway." The most painful transformation was watching her adopt Harold's mannerisms and speech patterns. My daughter, who once ate hot dogs with me at baseball games, now spoke about the importance of social capital and generational wealth. She began dropping hints about my appearance, suggesting I should update my wardrobe or consider getting my teeth whitened. 6 months ago, I attended a dinner party at the Ashford estate. While looking for the bathroom, I overheard Sarah speaking with Harold's sister, Patricia. My blood ran cold as I heard my daughter's voice. "Harold has taught me so much about navigating high society. Things my father, bless his heart, simply couldn't provide. Harold says breeding and education create a certain type of person, and honestly, I see what he means now." Patricia responded, "Dear, we all have relatives we'd rather forget. The important thing is that you're moving up in the world now. Sarah laughed, a tinkling sound I didn't recognize. Harold has been more of a mentor than my own father ever was. He actually understands ambition and success. I stood frozen in that hallway, feeling like a stranger in my own daughter's life. The little girl who once made me Father's Day cards with construction paper and glitter now saw me as an embarrassment to be managed. The drive home that night was the longest of my life. I thought about all those years of sacrifice, the dreams deferred, the body broken by manual labor, all so she could have opportunities I never did. And for what? To hear her erase my contribution to her success and attribute it to a man she'd known for less than 3 years. But the true betrayal was yet to be discovered. Last month, while helping Sarah pack up her apartment before the wedding, I came across a folder labeled Law School Memories. Expecting to find photos or memorabilia, I instead discovered a series of recommendation letters she'd written for various purposes. In each one, she credited Harold Ashford as her mentor throughout law school, claiming he had guided her studies and provided crucial networking opportunities. Law school. The same law school I had mortgaged my house to pay for. The same years when Harold didn't even know Sarah existed. She had retroactively written me out of her own history, replacing my sacrifices with Harold's imaginary guidance. I carefully returned the folder to its place, my hands surprisingly steady, despite the storm raging inside me. Sarah chatted happily about wedding preparations, oblivious to the fact that she had just shown me exactly what our relationship meant to her, nothing more than an inconvenient truth to be revised. 2 months before the wedding, I decided to surprise Sarah with lunch at her law firm. I knew she'd been stressed with wedding planning and thought her favorite sandwiches from Giuseppe's Deli might brighten her day. As I approached her office, I heard her voice through the partially open door. She was on the phone, and something in her tone made me pause. "Jessica, you have no idea how mortifying this is," Sarah said, her voice carrying that entitled whine I'd been hearing more frequently. "I have to invite his entire side of the family. Do you know what these people are like? My Uncle Carl still wears the same suit he bought in 1992, and my cousin Linda. She asked if she could bring a casserole to the reception. A casserole to the Fairmont." I stood frozen, the bag of sandwiches growing heavy in my hand. Jessica must have said something, because Sarah continued with a bitter laugh. "Oh, it gets worse. Dad actually suggested we use his friend's son as the DJ, some kid who spins records at high school dances. Can you imagine Harold nearly choked on his brandy when I told him? He said, and I quote, 'Darling, we can't have the wedding album looking like a coalition of the willing.'" The cruel mimicry of Harold's pompous tone cut deep, but not as much as her next words. "I'm already planning to legally change my last name to Ashford, not just taking James's name, but actually becoming Sarah Ashford entirely. Ronald's surname has done nothing but hold me back. Do you know how many times I've had to explain that yes, I'm Harold Ashford's future daughter-in-law, not some random paralegal? The Ashford name opens doors. My father's name, it smells like sawdust and failure." I backed away from the door, my stomach churning. The sandwiches found their way into a trash can as I stumbled back to my truck. That evening, I couldn't bring myself to ask about her day. Instead, I watched her across the dinner table, searching for any trace of the daughter I raised. She talked animatedly about centerpieces and seating charts, never mentioning her lunchtime conversation. A week later, Sarah asked me to help move some boxes from her apartment to the storage unit. While she took a phone call in the other room, I noticed her old diary sitting atop a box marked "Childhood Things." Curiosity and dread battled within me as I opened to a recent entry. The words blurred as I read. "Harold took me to lunch at the Union Club today. He's so sophisticated, so knowledgeable about everything that matters. He told me about his grandfather who built their family fortune from nothing. That's real American success," he said. "Not just working hard, but working smart, building something that lasts generations." I thought about Dad and felt that familiar shame. He works hard, sure, but what does he have to show for it? a bad back, and a modest savings account. Harold says the difference between laborers and leaders is vision, and he's right. Dad never saw beyond the next paycheck, the next job site. Harold has become the father figure I needed. Someone who understands that life is about more than just survival. It's about legacy, about rising above your circumstances. He's teaching me things Dad never could: how to navigate boardrooms, how to speak with authority, how to belong in spaces that matter. I love Dad, I do. But love doesn't erase the embarrassment I feel when Harold's friends ask about my background. Harold suggested I start referring to him as my mentor in professional settings. No need to complicate things with unnecessary details, he said. He's right. Why burden my future with the weight of my past? My hands trembled as I closed the diary. The phone call ended, and Sarah's footsteps approached. I quickly returned the diary and busied myself with taping a box. "Find anything interesting?" she asked casually. "Just memories." I managed, not trusting my voice to say more. That night, I made a decision. If Sarah wanted to erase me from her life story, I would let her. But I wouldn't make it easy. I called Marcus Stone, a private investigator, who'd done security work on my construction sites. We'd become friends over the years, and I knew he'd left the police force after exposing corruption in his department. "Marcus, I need your help," I said when he answered. "What's going on, Ron? You sound rough." "I need you to look into someone. Harold Ashford." There was a pause. The Harold Ashford of Ashford Industries. That's the one. He's about to become my son-in-law's father. "And you want dirt?" "I want the truth. Something tells me a man who judges others so harshly might have some judgments coming his way." Marcus whistled low. "This could get expensive, Ron, and complicated. I've got savings. And as for complicated, I thought about Sarah's diary about her plans to erase our name. It already is." Later that week, I discovered the letter that shattered any remaining illusions. While retrieving a photo album Sarah had requested for the wedding slideshow, I found an envelope addressed to Harold marked "Never Sent" in Sarah's handwriting. Against my better judgment, I read it. "Dear Harold, I wanted to express my gratitude for everything you've done for me these past 2 years. Before meeting you and James, I felt trapped by circumstances I couldn't control. You've shown me that birth doesn't determine worth, that we can choose our family in ways that matter. You are the father I always deserved but never had. Where Ronald gave me life, you've given me a future. Where he provided basics, you've offered sophistication. Where he showed me limitations, you've revealed possibilities. I know it might seem ungrateful to feel this way, but you've taught me that honesty, especially with ourselves, is paramount. Ronald is a good man, but good isn't always enough. You are a great man, and greatness inspires greatness in others. Thank you for accepting me as the daughter you never had, just as I've accepted you as the father I always wanted. With deepest admiration and love, Sarah." I photographed the letter with shaking hands before returning it to its place. This wasn't just rejection. It was a complete rewriting of history. Every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every nightmare I'd soothed, every birthday cake I'd baked, because I couldn't afford bakery prices, all erased in favor of a fantasy father who'd known her for 24 months. The investigation into Harold would begin immediately. If my daughter wanted a different father, she would get one. But she might not like what came with that wish. Marcus Stone sat across from me at Murphy's Tavern, a folder thick with documents between us. His expression was grim as he nursed his beer, clearly debating how much to reveal. "Ron, what I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything." He said, his voice low, despite the empty booth providing privacy. "I need to know Marcus, all of it." He opened the folder, revealing financial statements, photographs, and legal documents. "Harold Ashford isn't just wealthy. He's built an empire on other people's ruins. Started 30 years ago when he was a junior accountant at Brennan Manufacturing. The owner, Samuel Brennan, trusted Harold with the books. Marcus slid a newspaper clipping across the table. The headline read, "Manufacturing Giant Files for Bankruptcy After Accounting Scandal." Harold embezzled $2 million over 5 years. But here's the thing. He was smart about it. Set up a fall guy, another accountant named David Chen. Chen went to prison for 3 years while Harold used that stolen money to start Ashford Industries. My stomach churned. How did you find this? Chen's widow still lives in Chicago. She kept everything hoping someday someone would listen. Harold destroyed her husband. David died of a heart attack 2 years after getting out of prison broken and unable to find work. The revelations continued. Harold had systematically destroyed competitors through corporate espionage, bribed city officials for contracts, and maintained connections with organized crime figures who helped him intimidate union leaders. His pristine public image was a carefully maintained facade, hiding decades of corruption. But Ron, this is where it gets worse, Marcus said, pulling out bank statements. These offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, he's been evading taxes for 20 years. We're talking $50 million in hidden assets. The IRS would have a field day with this. How solid is this evidence? Solid enough that I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 separate locations. Harold has a lot of enemies who were very happy to talk once they knew someone was finally listening. I studied the documents my construction workers mined, appreciating the careful architecture of Harold's crimes. Like a building with a rotten foundation, it would all come crashing down with the right pressure applied at the right points. There's one more thing, Marcus added reluctantly. Your daughter's name appears on some recent documents. It looks like Harold's been preparing to shift some assets into her name. If the authorities investigate, she could be implicated. I finished my blood running cold. He's setting her up as a potential scapegoat. Classic Harold move, always have someone else to throw under the bus. That night, I made several decisions that would change the course of many lives. First, I contacted George Patterson, my old Army buddy, who now worked as a senior investigator for the IRS. George had been after Harold for years, but could never find concrete evidence. "Ronnie, is that you?" George's voice boomed through the phone. "Haven't heard from you since that barbecue last summer. George, I need to see you. It's important, and it's about Harold Ashford." The pause was significant. "How soon can you get to my office?" The next morning I sat in George's federal building office, watching his expression change from skepticism to predatory interest as he reviewed Marcus's findings. "Jesus Christ, Ron! Do you know what you've handed me? We've been trying to nail this bastard for a decade." "I need your word on something, George. My daughter's name is on some recent documents, but she doesn't know what she's involved in. Can you protect her?" George studied me carefully. If she cooperates and she's truly innocent of knowledge, we can work something out. But Ron, this is going to get ugly. When we move on, Harold, everyone connected to him will be scrutinized. I understand. When will you act? These things take time to build properly, but with this evidence, I'd say within 3 months. Can you live with that? 3 months. Sarah's wedding was in 2 months. The timing would be perfect. With the legal machinery in motion, I turned to my personal affairs. My savings account held $200,000, a lifetime of scrimping and saving for retirement. But I also owned assets I'd never dream of selling under normal circumstances. The lakeside cabin in Wisconsin had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with his own hands after returning from World War II. Every summer of Sarah's childhood was spent there, teaching her to fish, roasting marshmallows, watching the stars. The real estate agent valued it at $400,000. "You sure about this? Mr. Carpenter?" she asked. "This is a beautiful property, prime lakefront. It'll sell fast." "I'm sure. Just make it happen quickly." Next was my classic car collection. 5 vintage automobiles I'd restored myself over 20 years. The crown jewel was a 1967 Corvette Stingray in pristine condition. Selling them to collectors netted another $600,000. Each sale felt like cutting away a piece of my soul, but I pressed forward. My pension fund, when liquidated with penalties, provided another $800,000. Added to various bonds and investments, I had amassed nearly $3 million in liquid assets. Not bad for a construction foreman who never earned more than $80,000 a year. I met with Jonathan Hartwell, an estate attorney recommended by Marcus. His office reeked of old money and discretion. "Mr. Carpenter, what you're proposing is unusual," he said after I explained my requirements. "Can you do it?" "Oh, I can do it. The trust will be ironclad. Your daughter will only be able to access the funds if she meets your exact conditions publicly and legally. The humiliation aspect you've requested, the public apology, the name change reversal, it's all enforceable. And if she refuses, then the money goes to your designated charities after a 5-year waiting period. She gets nothing except the $1 you're leaving her in your will." "Perfect, draw it up." While Jonathan worked on the legal documents, I prepared the contents for the envelope that would be Sarah's wedding gift. Each piece was carefully chosen for maximum impact. First, a copy of my original will showing that she was to inherit everything: the cabin, the cars, all my savings. Every child's dream inheritance. Second, the new will leaving her exactly $1 with a note. "This is the value you placed on our relationship." Third, photographs Marcus had taken of Harold with known crime figures dated and documented. Fourth, financial records showing Harold's tax evasion schemes with Sarah's name highlighted on recent documents. Fifth, a detailed letter I spent 3 nights writing and rewriting, documenting every sacrifice I'd made for her, every moment of love she'd chosen, to forget every lie she'd told about Harold being her mentor. Finally, the trust fund documents. $10 million. My $3 million plus life insurance policies I'd taken out payable upon certain conditions being met. The conditions were simple but devastating. She must publicly apologize to me at a press conference, acknowledging her betrayal and my sacrifices. She must legally change her name back from Ashford. She must donate $1 million to a charity supporting single fathers. And she must have no contact with Harold Ashford ever again. As I sealed the envelope, my phone rang. It was Thomas, my younger brother. "Ron, Sarah called me. She wants to make sure you're coming to the wedding. Says you've been distant lately." "I'll be there, Thomas." "You okay? You sound different." "Just tired. Been working extra shifts." "You always did work too hard for that girl. She appreciated." I almost laughed at the bitter irony. "She will, Thomas. One way or another she will." The month before Sarah's wedding passed, in a blur of careful preparation. Marcus continued his surveillance of Harold, uncovering new details daily that made my stomach turn. The man wasn't just corrupt. He was a predator who destroyed lives without conscience. "Ron, you need to see this," Marcus said during one of our meetings at the diner. He slid a photograph across the table showing Harold's wife, Eleanor, leaving a small apartment building. "She visits this place every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Stays exactly 2 hours. Affair: her tennis instructor, Bradley Morrison, 28 years old. Been going on for 3 years according to the doorman I convinced to talk." I studied Eleanor's face in the photograph. Behind her perfect makeup and designer clothes, she looked exhausted, defeated even. "Harold, no. If he does, he doesn't care. Too busy with his own extracurriculars. I've documented him with at least 3 different women this month alone." This information about Eleanor became another weapon in my arsenal. A woman scorned might be exactly the ally I needed when Harold's world came crashing down. Meanwhile, George Patterson's IRS team was building their case with the meticulous patience of federal investigators. He called me with updates when possible. "We've got enough to bury him, Ron. The warrant's been approved. We'll be ready to move soon after your daughter's wedding. The Attorney General wants this to be airtight." "Any word on protecting Sarah?" "If she's truly an unwitting accomplice, we can work with that. But Ron, she'll need to distance herself completely from Harold when this goes down. The trust fund documents were finalized, and I spent considerable time ensuring everyone who mattered knew about Harold's corruption without revealing my source. At my local VFW hall, I casually mentioned to a group of veterans about contractors who used substandard materials in military housing. The story naturally evolved to discuss business corruption in general, and Harold's name came up organically. Ashford Industries. "Yeah, I've heard things," said Pete Kowalski, a former Marine who worked for the city planning department. "Guy's got a reputation for greasing palms." Similar conversations happened at my union meetings at church at the barbershop. By the time the wedding arrived, whispers about Harold Ashford's shady dealings had spread through the working-class community like wildfire. Many of these people would be attending Sarah's wedding from my side of the family. 3 weeks before the wedding, I arranged to meet Eleanor Ashford for coffee. She was suspicious at first when I called, but curiosity won out. We met at a discreet cafe downtown where she was unlikely to be recognized. "Mr. Carpenter." She said, her voice cultured but weary. "I must admit this is unexpected." "Please call me Ron. Thank you for meeting me." She studied me over her cappuccino. "You're different from what Harold described. He made you sound less substantial. Harold sees what he wants to see." "Don't we all?" she sighed. "Why am I here, Ron?" I chose my words carefully. "I think we both know this wedding represents something neither of us is entirely comfortable with. Your husband's influence over my daughter concerns me." Her laugh was bitter. "Harold's influence corrupts everything it touches, but you didn't need to meet me to know that." "No, but I thought you should know that Harold's past is about to catch up with him. When it does, anyone close to him might get splattered with the mess." Her eyes sharpened. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you, as one parent to another. Your son James seems like a decent young man. He doesn't deserve what's coming any more than Sarah does." Eleanor set down her cup with trembling fingers. "What do you know?" "Enough to know that when the federal investigators come knocking, Harold won't hesitate to throw anyone under the bus to save himself, including his own family." We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "He's been moving assets to Sarah's name. I tried to warn her subtly, but she's so blinded by his charm and promises. I'm handling that. But Eleanor, when everything falls apart, James will need his mother to be strong, and legally separated from Harold." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You know about Bradley. I know you deserve better than a man who treats his marriage like another business asset to manage." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "My divorce attorney. I've had the papers drawn up for 2 years, but never had the courage. Perhaps it's time." The reception would be a powerful moment for such an announcement. Very public. Impossible for Harold to manage or spin. She smiled for the first time, and I saw the woman she must have been before Harold dimmed her light. "You're more strategic than Harold gave you credit for, Ron. I'm just a father trying to protect his daughter, even from herself." With Eleanor potentially on board, I made one final preparation. I visited James at his office ostensibly to discuss wedding logistics. "Ron, come in." James greeted me warmly. Unlike his father, James had always treated me with genuine respect. "Can I get you some coffee?" As we settled into his office, I studied the young man my daughter was marrying. 28 years old, Ernest working as a financial analyst at a firm that notably wasn't connected to his father's empire. "James, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How much do you know about what your father does? His business dealings?" James's expression grew guarded. "I know enough to know I want no part of it. That's why I've never worked for him, much to his disgust." "And Sarah, how much does she know?" "Sarah sees what she wants to see. She's ambitious, Ron. Dad recognized that and cultivated it. I've tried to warn her to be careful, but she thinks I'm being paranoid." "You love her?" "Very much. But sometimes I worry I'm marrying 2 people. The Sarah I fell in love with and the Sarah my father is creating." I leaned forward. James, your father is going to face a reckoning soon. It's going to be severe and public. Sarah's going to need someone who loves her for who she really is, not who Harold tried to make her become. James paled. How bad? Federal investigation bad. Asset seizure bad. Possible prison time bad. Jesus. He ran his hands through his hair. Soon after your wedding. I'm telling you this because you seem like a good man who genuinely loves my daughter. When Harold falls, she's going to need someone to help her remember who she really is. Can you be that person? James met my eyes steadily. I knew this day would come eventually. Yes, Ron. I'll stand by Sarah. The real Sarah, not Harold's creation. As I left James's office, I felt a small measure of relief. Perhaps Sarah would have someone to catch her when her fantasies came crashing down. The final piece fell into place when I visited Sarah at her apartment one last time before the wedding. She was frantically organizing last-minute details, barely acknowledging my presence as I helped her pack decorations into boxes. Dad, can you put these place cards in that container and make sure they stay in order? The seating chart took forever to perfect. I carefully packed the cards, noting how she'd segregated the guests. Harold's associates and society friends at prominent tables, my family relegated to the back corners, like an embarrassing afterthought. Sarah, I said quietly, I want you to know that no matter what happens, you'll always be my daughter. She paused, perhaps hearing something in my tone. For a moment the mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during movie nights. Dad, why are you being so weird? Everything's going to be perfect. Harold's made sure of it. As he's Sarah, do you remember what your mother used to say about perfect? She stiffened. Mom's been gone a long time, Dad. She used to say that perfect was the enemy of good, that chasing perfection meant missing the beauty of what we already had. Well, maybe Mom was wrong. Maybe some of us want more than just good enough. I absorbed the blow and continued packing. I'll see you at the wedding, sweetheart. As I turned to leave, she called out, Dad, you are happy for me, right? This is what I've always wanted. I looked back at her, memorizing her face before everything changed. I hope you get exactly what you've always wanted, Sarah. Sometimes that's the only way we learn what we actually need. The morning of Sarah's wedding dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect June days that seemed crafted for photographs. I arrived at the Fairmont Hotel 3 hours before the ceremony, ostensibly to help with setup, but really to ensure everything was in place for what would come. The envelope sat heavy in my jacket pocket as I walked through the opulent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across white tablecloths, and thousands of dollars worth of roses perfumed the air. Harold had spared no expense in creating what he called the society wedding of the season. Ronald. My brother Thomas appeared at my elbow looking uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. Hell of a place. Must be costing Harold a fortune. Harold's good at spending money that isn't his, I replied, then caught myself. Sorry, Thomas. Nerves. Thomas studied me with the keen eye of a younger brother who'd watched me navigate life's storms. You sure you're okay? You've been different lately. Quieter. Just watching my little girl get married makes a man think. We were interrupted by Harold's booming voice as he directed the hotel staff like a general commanding troops. He spotted me and strode over his perfectly tailored morning coat, making my best suit look shabby by comparison. Ronald, good of you to come early, he said with false warmth. Though really, we have everything under control. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the lounge until the ceremony. I'm fine here, Harold. Want to see everything come together. His smile tightened. Of course, though do try not to get in the staff's way. This isn't quite like setting up a construction site, is it? Thomas bristled beside me, but I put a calming hand on his arm. No, it's not. Construction's honest work. You build something real, something that lasts, not like smoke and mirrors. Harold's eyes narrowed, perhaps sensing something beneath my mild tone. Before he could respond, Eleanor appeared looking stunning in pale blue silk. Harold, the photographer, needs you for some family portraits, she said, her voice steady, despite what I knew she was planning. As they walked away, Thomas whistled low. That woman looks like she's heading to a funeral, not her son's wedding. Maybe she is, I murmured, then louder. Come on, let's check out our tables. The seating arrangement confirmed what I'd seen at Sarah's apartment. Table 12, tucked behind a pillar near the service entrance, held place cards for my family. My cousins, the ones who'd loved Sarah like their own daughter, were seated so far from the head table they'd need binoculars to see the bride. This is bullshit, Thomas said, reading the cards. Cousin Marie drove 8 hours to be here. She taught Sarah to ride a bike for Christ's sake. It's Sarah's choice, I said, pulling the envelope from my pocket. I placed it carefully at Sarah's seat at the head table, positioning it so she couldn't miss it. They all are. Guests began arriving an hour before the ceremony. I stationed myself near the entrance, greeting people from both sides. The contrast was stark. Harold's guests arrived in luxury cars, dripping with jewelry and self-importance. My family came in carpools, wearing their best clothes and genuine smiles. Uncle Ron, my niece Rebecca, hugged me tightly. Sarah must be so happy. You did such a good job raising her after Aunt Margaret passed. Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot. I watched Harold work the room, glad-handing his society friends, while pointedly ignoring my relatives. Occasionally, someone would approach him with a strange expression, and I knew my planted seeds about his corruption were bearing fruit. Pete Kowalski from the VFW had done his job well. Half the city's working class now knew Harold Ashford was dirty. Mr. Carpenter. A soft voice interrupted my observations. Bradley Morrison, Eleanor's tennis instructor, stood beside me, looking deeply uncomfortable in his ill-fitting suit. Bradley, Eleanor invited you? He flushed. She insisted I come. Said it was important I be here for the reception. I don't understand why. I pitied the young man who was about to become part of Eleanor's very public declaration of independence. Just be ready to support her when she needs it. That's all any of us can do today. The ceremony itself was a study in contrasts. Sarah looked breathtaking in her designer gown, every inch the society bride Harold had molded her to become. But when she walked down the aisle, it was on my arm, and for those few minutes I felt the ghost of our old connection. You look beautiful, sweetheart, I whispered as we paused at the altar. Thanks, Daddy, she whispered back, and my heart broke a little more at the childish endearment she rarely used anymore. The officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, and I delivered my line, her mother and I do. Margaret should have been here. She would have known how to prevent this disaster, how to save our daughter from herself. As I took my seat, I noticed George Patterson in the back row. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod. The IRS was watching, ready to move when the time came. James spoke his vows with genuine emotion, and I found myself hoping he was strong enough for what was coming. Sarah's vows were polished perfect and somehow empty. She spoke more to the audience than to her husband. When the officiant pronounced them married, the room erupted in applause. Harold beamed like he'd just closed a billion-dollar deal. Eleanor stood frozen, her smile a masterpiece of social fakery. And I sat quietly, knowing that in just a few hours this glittering facade would come crashing down. The cocktail hour was torture. I mingled with guests accepting congratulations that felt like condolences. Several of Harold's business associates approached me with barely concealed curiosity. You must be so proud, said one, a shark-faced man named Daniels. Sarah's come so far from her humble beginnings. Every parent wants their child to succeed, I replied carefully, though success means different things to different people. Indeed, Harold speaks very highly of Sarah's potential, says she has the killer instinct necessary for real achievement. Does he? Funny. I always thought her greatest strength was her compassion. She used to volunteer at the homeless shelter every weekend in high school. Daniels looked uncomfortable. Yes, well, we all have our youthful indiscretions. Is compassion an indiscretion in Harold's world? That explains a lot. I moved on before he could respond, leaving him to ponder that observation. The reception ballroom doors opened, and guests began filing in for dinner. I took my place at table 12, surrounded by my family, who'd made the effort to be here, despite being treated as afterthoughts. "Look at this," Cousin Marie said, gesturing at the head table where Sarah sat between James and Harold. "She's not even looking our way. When did our Sarah become too good for her own family?" "When Harold convinced her we were holding her back," I said quietly. The meal progressed with military precision. Harold had hired the best caterers, and even from our exile behind the pillar, the food was exceptional. But every bite tasted like ash, as I watched Sarah laugh at Harold's jokes, hang on his every word, while the man who'd actually raised her sat forgotten in the shadows. Finally, the moment arrived. The best man finished his toast, and Harold stood to speak. His speech was a masterclass in revisionist history, taking credit for Sarah's success, her education, her character development. He painted himself as the mentor who'd recognized her potential and nurtured it. Sarah came to us rough around the edges. Harold said, earning uncomfortable chuckles from those who knew the truth. But with proper guidance and exposure to the right influences, she's become the sophisticated woman you see before you today. My hands clenched into fists as he continued. Thomas put a warning hand on my shoulder, but I wasn't going to react. Not yet. Then Harold raised his glass for the final toast. "To Sarah and James, and to the family she's joining, the family she was always meant to be part of." Sarah stood next, and my heart began to pound. This was it. The moment that would change everything. She raised her champagne glass, her eyes finding mine across the room. For a second, I saw something flicker. Doubt, regret. But then her expression hardened into the polished mask Harold had taught her to wear. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate with us," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. This day represents not just a marriage, but a transformation, a elevation, a dream finally realized. She turned to look directly at Harold, and her next words drove the knife deep into my heart. "All my life, I wanted to have a different father," she said, her voice gaining strength. "A father who could teach me about success, about ambition, about reaching for more than just survival. And finally, this dream has come true." The room held its breath as she moved around the table to embrace Harold. The blood roared in my ears as she continued. "Harold, you've shown me what it means to truly succeed. You've been the father figure I needed, the mentor I craved, the example I will follow for the rest of my life. Thank you for accepting me as your daughter." The applause was thunderous from Harold's side of the room, while my family sat in stunned silence. Sarah returned to her seat without looking my way again, as if I'd ceased to exist the moment she spoke those words. I stood slowly, my movements careful and deliberate. Every eye in the room turned to me as I walked toward the head table. Sarah's expression shifted from triumph to confusion as I approached. "Dad," she said uncertainly. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, setting it beside her plate with steady hands. "Your wedding gift, sweetheart. Everything a daughter who dreams of a different father deserves." Then I turned and walked toward the exit, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind me, I heard Harold's voice, dismissive and amused. "Let him go. Some people just don't know how to handle elegant occasions." But I also heard the sound of paper rustling as Sarah opened the envelope. I paused at the doorway, looking back one last time to see her face draining of color as she read the first document. Then I left my daughter's wedding, knowing that her world was about to collapse and that she had no one to blame but herself. I made it as far as the hotel lobby before Thomas caught up with me, his face flushed from running in his tuxedo. "Ron, what the hell did you just do?" he gasped, grabbing my arm. "You can't just walk out of Sarah's wedding." "Watch me," I said, but I stopped walking. Part of me wanted to be far away when Sarah fully comprehended what was in that envelope. But another part, the father in me who'd kissed skinned knees and checked for monsters under the bed, needed to know how she'd react. "At least tell me what was in the envelope," Thomas pleaded. Before I could answer, we heard a commotion from the ballroom, raised voices, a crash of dishes, then Eleanor's voice cutting through the chaos with crystalline clarity. "I want a divorce, Harold." Thomas's eyes widened. "What the—" "Come on," I said, leading him to a side entrance where we could observe without being seen. The scene in the ballroom was pure chaos. Sarah sat frozen at the head table, documents spread before her like tarot cards predicting disaster. Her face cycled through emotions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally rage. Eleanor stood center stage, Bradley beside her, addressing the stunned crowd. "For 25 years, I've watched my husband destroy everything he touches with his greed and corruption. Well, no more. I've filed for divorce, and I'm taking half of everything. Whatever's left after the federal investigation is through with him." Harold's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "Eleanor, sit down. You're making a spectacle of yourself." "Oh, Harold!" Eleanor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The spectacle is just beginning." But all of that was background noise to what was happening with Sarah. She held up the first document, my original will, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. $10 million, she whispered. Then louder, $10 million. James reached for her, but she jerked away, grabbing the next document. The new will. Her face crumpled as she read the single bequest, $1. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no, this can't be real." Harold, distracted from Eleanor's bombshell, noticed Sarah's distress. "Darling, what's wrong? What did that pathetic man give you?" Sarah held up the photographs with trembling hands. Even from across the room, the images were clear. Harold with known crime figures, Harold in meetings with corrupt officials, Harold's web of deception laid bare. "These pictures," Sarah's voice cracked. "Harold, who are these people?" Harold's expression went from concerned to calculating in an instant. "Obviously doctored photos, my dear. Your father's pathetic attempt at causing trouble. Give them to me." But Sarah had already moved on to the financial documents. As someone who'd graduated from law school, she understood their implications immediately. Her name, highlighted in yellow, appeared on numerous suspicious transfers. "You put my name on these accounts!" Her voice rose to a shriek. "Harold, this is money laundering. This is tax evasion. You made me complicit in federal crimes." The ballroom had gone dead silent, except for Sarah's increasingly hysterical voice. Guests stood frozen champagne flutes suspended mid-sip, as the society wedding of the season transformed into a Shakespearean tragedy. "Sarah, calm down," Harold commanded, reaching for the documents. "Done!" "Don't touch me!" Sarah screamed, backing away. She clutched the letter I'd written, tears streaming down her face as she read my words aloud. "My dearest Sarah, by the time you read this, you'll have gotten your wish for a different father. I hope he's everything you dreamed of. Enclosed, you'll find evidence of who Harold Ashford really is, a criminal who built his empire on the graves of good men like David Chen, whose widow still cries for justice. You'll also find documents showing how Harold has been using you, putting your name on illegal transactions that could destroy your legal career before it begins. The father you chose over me has made you his accomplice, his future scapegoat when the FBI comes calling. But I'm still your father, even if you wish I weren't. So I've left you a choice. $10 million waits in a trust fund, my life savings, the cabin your mother loved, the cars I restored with these hands you're so ashamed of, and insurance policies I took out working extra shifts you never knew about. All you have to do is publicly apologize for your betrayal, acknowledge the truth about who raised you, and legally change your name back. Renounce Harold completely, or keep your new father and your new name and inherit exactly what our relationship is worth to you, $1. The FBI raid is coming, Sarah. The IRS is coming. Harold's empire will fall, and everyone close to him will be investigated. You have perhaps minutes to decide which father you really want. Despite everything, I love you. But love without respect is just pain, and I'm done being your source of shame. Dad. Sarah's sobs echoed through the ballroom. She turned to Harold, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. Is it true? Did you use me? Harold's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Don't be naive, Sarah. You wanted to play in the big leagues. There's a cost. You said I was like a daughter to you. You are. I use my real children too. It's called business. That's when the doors burst open. FBI, nobody move. George Patterson led a team of federal agents into the ballroom, their badges gleaming under the chandeliers. The guests scrambled backward as agents moved with practiced precision toward Harold. Phooey. Harold Ashford, you're under arrest for tax evasion, money laundering, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. This is preposterous, Harold blustered. I'll have your badge. Do you know who I am? Yeah, George said with grim satisfaction. You're the man who's going to federal prison for a very long time. As they cuffed Harold, he turned to Sarah with vicious spite. You think you're safe, little girl. Your name is all over those documents. When I go down, you're coming with me. Sarah collapsed into her chair, the wedding dress pooling around her like a shroud. The trust fund documents lay before her, the conditions clear and merciless. $10 million. But only if she destroyed the very identity she'd killed her relationship with me to create. James knelt beside her, trying to offer comfort, but she pushed him away. You knew, didn't you? You knew what your father was. I tried to warn you, James said quietly. But you didn't want to hear it? Sarah. Eleanor approached Bradley, forgotten in the chaos. Your father tried to warn me too. He's the only person in this room who tried to protect you. Protect me, Sarah laughed hysterically. He destroyed me. He destroyed everything. No, honey, Eleanor said firmly. You destroyed everything the moment you chose Harold's illusion over your father's love. The FBI agents were efficient photographing documents, interviewing guests, creating a crime scene out of what should have been a celebration. Several of Harold's associates were also arrested, their wives shrieking as handcuffs clicked around expensively manicured wrists. I watched from my hidden vantage point as Sarah faced her moment of truth. She had to decide now: apologize, publicly renounce Harold, reclaim her name and her father's fortune, or stand by her choices and lose everything. She stood slowly, unsteadily, still clutching the trust fund documents. The room watched as she approached the microphone at the head table. Her voice when she spoke was broken but clear. I need to say something, she began. The FBI agents paused their work, everyone turning to watch the bride. My father is... She stopped, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. The glittering chandeliers, the expensive flowers, the society crowd who'd already begun to distance themselves from the scandal. My father is Ronald Carpenter. She continued stronger now. He's a construction foreman. He raised me alone after my mother died. He worked 16-hour days to put me through private school and college. He sold everything he owned to pay for my law school. Her voice broke completely. He loved me when I didn't deserve it, and I threw him away for a criminal who saw me as nothing but a tool to use. The room held its breath. This was it, the public apology the trust fund required. But Sarah's next words shattered any hope of redemption. But I can't, she whispered into the microphone. I can't apologize for wanting more. I can't apologize for dreaming bigger than a construction site. I made my choice. She dropped the microphone feedback, screeching through the speakers, and fled the ballroom. James ran after her, calling her name, but she was gone. Eleanor approached my hiding spot somehow, knowing I was there. She's her father's daughter, after all, she said sadly. Too proud to bend even when breaking is the only option left. Thomas stood beside me, his face grim. What now? Now. I stepped out of the shadows, watching the FBI agents load Harold into a waiting car. Now she learns what her new father's love is really worth. The wedding that had started as a fairy tale had become a cautionary tale. The bride who'd wished for a different father had gotten exactly what she'd asked for, and lost everything that actually mattered in the process. As I walked through the ruins of the reception past overturned chairs and abandoned champagne, I felt the weight of the tragedy. Not Harold's arrest. He deserved his fate. Not even Sarah's downfall. She'd chosen her path with eyes wide open. No, the tragedy was that somewhere between the little girl who made me Father's Day cards and the woman who publicly disowned me, I'd lost my daughter. And $10 million couldn't buy her back. The next 6 months unfolded like a Shakespearean tragedy played out in newspaper headlines and federal courtrooms. I watched from a distance as my daughter's carefully constructed world crumbled piece by piece. The first blow came within days of the wedding. The FBI's investigation revealed that Harold had been even more systematic in his use of Sarah than I'd imagined. Her name appeared on dozens of shell companies, fake consulting agreements, and offshore accounts. While the prosecutors eventually determined she was an unwitting accomplice, the damage to her reputation was catastrophic. The State Bar Association suspended her license pending investigation. The prestigious law firm that had hired her, Preston and Associates, terminated her employment immediately. They couldn't afford to be associated with the Ashford scandal even peripherally. I heard about these developments through Thomas and other family members. Sarah had cut off all contact with me, but the family grapevine was efficient. She'd tried to reach out to her society friends, the ones she'd cultivated so carefully under Harold's guidance, but they disappeared like morning mist. In their world, scandal was contagious, and Sarah was patient zero. James, to his credit, stood by her initially. He moved them into a small apartment after their house was seized as part of Harold's asset forfeiture. But the stress of the situation combined with Sarah's refusal to admit any wrongdoing eventually broke them. She keeps saying you set her up. Thomas told me over coffee one morning. James finally had enough. Said he couldn't help someone who wouldn't help herself. The divorce papers were filed just 3 months after the wedding. Sarah, who'd dreamed of being society royalty, was now a pariah, with a suspended law license, no money, and no family willing to claim her. Well, almost no family. I kept tabs on her, even as she spiraled. When she was evicted from the apartment, I made sure Thomas accidentally mentioned it at a family gathering, knowing word would get back to her cousins. When she pawned her wedding ring to buy groceries, I ensured the pawn shop owner, an old friend from the VFW, gave her twice what it was worth. But I never reached out directly. The terms of the trust fund were clear. She had to come to me. She had to publicly acknowledge what she'd done and ask for forgiveness. Pride, Harold had taught her, was everything. Unfortunately, pride doesn't pay rent or buy food. The 4th month brought Harold's trial. I attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom as witness after witness testified to his decades of corruption. David Chen's widow took the stand, describing how Harold had destroyed her husband's life. She looked directly at Sarah, who was required to attend as a potential witness, and said, "I hope his money was worth it, dear. It cost my children their father." Sarah didn't testify. Her lawyer advised against it, but she had to sit through Harold's defense strategy, which essentially threw her under the bus. His attorneys painted her as an ambitious young woman who'd inserted herself into his business dealings without authorization. Even facing 20 years in prison, Harold was willing to destroy the woman he'd called daughter to save himself. He was convicted on all counts. The judge, citing the devastating impact of his crimes on multiple families, sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. As they led him away in shackles, Harold looked at Sarah one last time. "You were useful while you lasted," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Sarah fled the courtroom in tears. That was the day she finally broke. Eleanor Ashford. Now, Eleanor Morrison, after a quick remarriage to Bradley, reached out to me that evening. "She's been living in her car," she said over the phone. "I saw her at the grocery store. She looks terrible, Ron. Thin, exhausted. I tried to give her money, but she ran away." Living in her car. My daughter, who'd sneered at my modest home, who'd been embarrassed by my work truck, was now homeless. The irony was as bitter as burnt coffee. Month 5 brought an unexpected visitor to my door. James stood on my porch, looking older than his 29 years. "Ron, I need to talk to you about Sarah." I invited him in, poured him coffee, and listened as he described the woman my daughter had become. Paranoid, bitter, still clinging to the delusion that everyone else was to blame for her situation. "I loved her," James said quietly. "Hell, part of me still does. But she's so invested in being the victim that she can't see the truth. She actually said you planned Harold's arrest to hurt her, that you've been jealous of her success all along." "What do you want me to do, James?" "I don't know. Maybe nothing can be done. I just thought you should know that she's been hanging around the law library trying to research ways to overturn the trust fund conditions. She's convinced there's a loophole that will let her get the money without admitting fault." Of course she was. Harold's greatest poison was teaching her that accountability was for other people, that clever lawyers could always find a way around consequences. "There's no loophole," I said simply. "My attorney made sure of that." "I know, but she won't accept it. She's waiting tables at a diner off Highway 12. The owner's an old friend of yours, apparently. Only reason she got the job." Frank's diner. I'd helped Frank renovate the place years ago when he was starting out. Good man. He'd keep an eye on her without her knowing I'd asked. Month 6 arrived with winter's bite. Chicago's December was brutal that year, and every cold night I thought about my daughter in her car. I'd raised her, changed her diapers, taught her to read, held her through nightmares. Every instinct screamed to go find her, to bring her home, to fix this like I'd fixed every other problem in her life. But I couldn't. Not this time. This was a lesson that couldn't be taught with gentle words or paternal protection. Some truths only sink in when you hit rock bottom and realize you're holding the shovel. Then on December 20th, a knock at my door changed everything. I opened it to find Sarah standing on my porch, a ghost of the woman who'd declared me inadequate 6 months ago. She was thin, her designer clothes replaced by a second-hand coat, too large for her frame. Her eyes, once so full of ambition, and Harold's poison, now held something I'd never seen before. Genuine humility. "Dad," she whispered, and then she was crying, great gulping sobs that shook her entire body. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." I pulled her inside, wrapped her in the Afghan Margaret had crocheted during her last good month, and let her cry. No words, no recriminations, just a father holding his broken daughter while the snow fell outside. When the tears finally stopped, she told me everything. The nights sleeping in her car. The humiliation of begging for extra shifts. The way Harold's former associates laughed when she asked for help. The moment she realized that everything Harold had given her was built on sand, while everything I'd given her, the education, the work ethic, the values she'd rejected, were the only things that couldn't be taken away. "I read about your foundation," she said quietly. "The one for single fathers. I saw the interview you gave about why you started it." I'd been honest in that interview, perhaps too honest. I'd talked about losing a daughter not to death, but to misplaced values about hoping other fathers could avoid my mistakes. "You didn't make mistakes," Sarah said. "I did. I chose Harold because he offered me shortcuts. You only ever offered me the truth, and I was too arrogant to see its value." We talked through the night. She told me about the moment she realized Harold saw her as disposable, sitting in that courtroom, hearing him blame her for crimes she didn't commit or understand. She told me about calling the Ashford house from a payphone, only to have the housekeeper inform her that she was on a list of people to be turned away. James tried to warn me, she admitted. Even Eleanor tried, but I was so sure I was smarter than everyone else. Harold made me feel special, like I was finally becoming who I was meant to be. And who was that? She laughed bitterly. Someone just like him. Cold, calculating, willing to step on anyone to get ahead. He saw that potential in me and nurtured it. The sick thing is, Dad, I was good at it. I was becoming exactly what he wanted. If the FBI hadn't arrested him, I probably would have helped him destroy other families like the Chens without batting an eye. The next morning, she asked about the trust fund. The conditions haven't changed, I told her. Public apology, legal name change, donation to charity, no contact with Harold or his associates ever again. I know. I'm ready. Not for the money. I mean, God knows I need it. But because it's right. Because I need to say publicly what I did to you. What I let Harold turn me into. We arranged the press conference for January 2nd after the holidays. Word spread quickly. The fallen society bride ready to tell her story. Local news stations jumped at the chance to cover it, the scandal still fresh enough to draw viewers. Sarah stood at the podium in the same second-hand coat she'd worn to my door. No makeup, no jewelry, just my daughter finally telling the truth. My name is Sarah Carpenter. She began, her voice steady. 6 months ago, I was Sarah Ashford, and I stood in front of many of you at my wedding and disowned the man who raised me. I chose a criminal who promised me wealth and status over the father who gave me everything that actually matters. She told the whole story, the gradual seduction of Harold's world, the way he isolated her from her family by making her ashamed of them. The moment she realized she'd traded unconditional love for conditional approval. My father, Ronald Carpenter, is the finest man I know. He worked construction in 100-degree heat and 10-degree cold to pay for my education. He sold family heirlooms to give me opportunities. He loved me when I was at my most unlovable. And I threw him away for a man who saw me as nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded. She looked directly at the cameras. I'm publicly apologizing not because there's money attached to it, but because I need everyone to know what kind of man Ronald Carpenter is. He's the father every child deserves, but not every child appreciates until it's too late. I almost became one of those children who learn too late. To anyone watching who has a parent who loves them, who sacrifices for them, who may not have wealth or status but has integrity, don't make my mistake. Don't trade real love for fool's gold. The price is higher than you can imagine. After the press conference, she legally changed her name back to Carpenter. The donation to the Single Fathers Foundation was the first check she wrote. She had no contact with Harold, who was serving his sentence in federal prison, abandoned by everyone except the lawyers still billing his frozen accounts. The trust fund money allowed her to restart her life, but more importantly, it allowed her to rebuild our relationship. She used part of it to go back to school this time to become a teacher. I want to help kids who might be vulnerable to people like Harold, she explained. Kids who think their worth is tied to their bank account or their last name. She moved into a modest apartment near mine. We have dinner together twice a week now. Sometimes James joins us. They're taking things slow, rebuilding on a foundation of truth rather than Harold's illusions. Eleanor sends Christmas cards. She and Bradley seem happy. She included a note in the last one. Thank you for the warning. Thanks to you, I got out before the ship sank completely. Harold's empire was liquidated to pay restitution to his victims. David Chen's widow received a substantial settlement. The Single Fathers Foundation received an unexpected donation from the Federal Asset Forfeiture Fund. Poetic justice, in a way. But the greatest justice, the one that brings me peace, is simpler. Last Sunday, Sarah and I went fishing at a lake outside the city. Not the family cabin, that was sold to create her trust fund, but a public pier where anyone with a rod and hope can cast a line. Dad, she said as we watched the sunrise paint the water gold. I need to tell you something. What's that, sweetheart? All my life I wanted to have a father who loved me unconditionally, who would sacrifice anything for my happiness, who would forgive me even when I didn't deserve it. She turned to me with tears in her eyes. I've always had that father. I just lost sight of him for a while. We fished in comfortable silence after that father and daughter no longer divided by pride or shame or misplaced ambitions. Just two people who'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give their child is the chance to fail, fall, and find their way back home. The diner where Sarah worked during her hard months, Franks hired her cousin Linda's daughter, another young woman needing a second chance. Sarah recommended her, saying, "Everyone deserves the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. As for me, I still work construction. My hands are still calloused, my back still aches, but my heart is whole again." The daughter I raised came back to me not as the society princess Harold tried to create, but as the woman Margaret would have been proud to call her daughter. The wedding gift that destroyed everything also rebuilt everything, just not in the way anyone expected. $10 million bought my daughter a lesson that all Harold's wealth couldn't teach: the difference between price and value, between success and worth, between being somebody important and being someone good. Some might say I was cruel making her suffer for 6 months before taking her back. But love isn't just about comfort. Sometimes it's about allowing consequences to teach what words cannot. Sarah needed to lose everything to understand what she'd thrown away. She needed to see Harold's true face to appreciate the father she'd always had. Now, when people ask about that infamous wedding, about the envelope that brought down Harold Ashford and saved my daughter's soul, I tell them the truth. It wasn't about revenge or justice, or even tough love. It was about a father who refused to let his daughter's story end with her choosing fool's gold over real treasure. Sarah volunteers at the foundation, now mentoring young women who are vulnerable to men like Harold. She tells them her story, showing her suspended law license and her wedding photos as cautionary artifacts. This is what happens, she tells them, when you value the wrong things, when you let someone convince you that who you are isn't enough. Last week, a young woman in the program asked her, "How do you know if someone really loves you or if they're just using you?" Sarah's answer was simple. Someone who loves you helps you become the best version of yourself. Someone who's using you helps you become the best version for them. My father wanted me to be happy, healthy, and good. Harold wanted me to be useful. Learn the difference. Your life depends on it. To those of you watching who've faced similar betrayals from children who chose material wealth over family bonds, know that redemption is possible. But it requires the hardest kind of love, the love that steps back and allows failure to teach what success never could. And to those of you who, like Sarah, once did dream of trading your humble roots for glossier gardens, remember this: a father's calloused hands built more than Harold's soft ones ever could. They built a foundation strong enough to survive even his daughter's betrayal, and still be standing when she found her way home. Would I do it all again? Every painful second. Because in the end, I didn't just save my daughter from Harold Ashford, I saved her from the person Harold was turning her into. And that person, the cold, calculating woman who would disown her father for social gain, that person was the real danger all along. The trust fund still exists, managed carefully, and growing steadily. Sarah could live comfortably on the interest alone, but she chooses to work to teach to serve. She says the money is a reminder, not a reward. A reminder of what pride costs and what humility can restore. Sometimes on quiet evenings, she'll pull out that old construction paper Father's Day card she made when she was 6. We found it in a box of her childhood things I'd saved. "Happy Father's Day to the best daddy in the whole world," it reads in crooked crayon letters. "Still can't spell," I tease her. "Still the best daddy in the whole world," she replies. And that more than any amount of money or public apologies or legal victories is the only vindication that matters. The construction site wisdom I learned over 40 years of building proved true. In the end, you can't build anything lasting on a rotten foundation. Harold's empire fell because it was built on lies and exploitation. But a relationship built on love, even when damaged by betrayal, can be repaired if both parties are willing to do the work. Sarah and I did the work. We cleared away the debris of her mistakes and my hurt. We laid new foundation stones of honesty and mutual respect. And we built something Harold, for all his wealth and sophistication, never had and never understood. A family that money can't buy and scandal can't destroy. My daughter wished for a different father and got one. Then she learned that what we wish for and what we need are rarely the same thing. Harold gave her what she wished for. I gave her what she needed. In the end, need won over, want truth, won over illusion, and love won over everything else. That's the real lesson of the envelope that shattered my daughter's wedding day and saved her life. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is the freedom to fail and the patience to wait for the return journey home. Sarah's home now, not in the mansion she dreamed of or the penthouse Harold promised, but in the modest apartment where she grades papers and prepares lessons for kids who need to hear her story. Home in the weekly dinners where we talk about everything and nothing. Home in the understanding that some treasures can't be bought, only earned through humility and held through gratitude. My father was right. I see that now. Building something real, something that lasts, something that matters. That's the only success worth having. Everything else, that's just Harold's smoke and mirrors, promising everything and delivering nothing but pain. The wedding gift I gave my daughter wasn't cruel. It was the kindest thing I could do, showing her the truth before it was too late to choose a different path. She chose correctly, eventually, and that choice, made from the ruins of everything she thought she wanted, rebuilt us both. So to everyone watching, what would you do if faced with a similar betrayal? Would you enable the destruction by pretending everything was fine? Or would you love someone enough to let them face the consequences of their choices? If you found value in this story, please consider commenting below with your own experiences of family betrayal and redemption. Like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe to hear more stories of justice and second chances, and share this with anyone who needs to remember that true love sometimes means letting go so they can find their way back. Thank you for joining me on this journey from heartbreak to healing. May you never need such difficult lessons. But if you do, may you have the courage to learn them and the wisdom to teach them. Remember, the most expensive mistakes often carry the most valuable lessons, and sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. Until next time, hold your loved ones' close, value character over credentials, and never forget that a parent's love isn't measured in what we give our children, but in who we help them become.